For more on the Russian offensive on the Donbas and why this part of Ukraine is so important to Russia, we turn to Samuel Charap. He's a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation. He's the author of Everyone Loses: The Ukraine Crisis and the Ruinous Contest for Post-Soviet Eurasia. Sam Charap, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, give us a sense of what the Donbas consists of. We know there's industry there, but give us a sense how much of it is urban, the terrain, and so forth.
So this is Ukraine's industrial heartland. It's been a mining center since the 19th century. It's an area slightly smaller than the state of West Virginia, and is largely, in terms of its topography, plains, unlike the forests north of Kiev, where much of the fighting early on in the conflict was taking place. Russia's controlled about 30% of the territory, to include the two biggest cities now, for over 7 years, and it is trying to achieve control over the entirety of these two regions that compose the Donbas, the Donetsk and Luhansk regions.
And what difference would it make for Russia if they were able to control all of the Donbas? What would it give them?
So the pretext that Russian President Vladimir Putin gave for the war was to protect the people of the Donbas, who, although Russian-speaking, are certainly not exclusively ethnically Russian, but to protect them from what he called a genocide, the evidence for which was pretty non-existent. Nonetheless, what he did in the day before he announced his attack on Ukraine was to recognize the so-called independence of these two regions of Ukraine within their full administrative boundaries. So not just the 30% that the Russian-backed separatists controlled, but the entirety of those two regions. And so basically one of the main operational objectives since the beginning of the war has been taking control over those two full regions. Additionally, a significant concentration of Ukrainian forces has remained on the front lines that was previously, before February 24th, the main front line in Ukraine, that's site of the conflict in the Donbas. And so if the Russian forces can take those Ukrainian military concentration out, it would be a significant blow to the Ukrainian military.
So that's the question. I mean, how difficult or how easy is it going to be for Russia to swallow up this big area? You were telling us it's a lot bigger than people realize, and you've talked about, we've all seen the Ukrainian resistance has been fierce.
Absolutely. And, in some of these places, they've had 8 years to build defensive fortifications and other ways, basically to dig in. So a frontal assault was never going to be possible, or was at least going to be extremely difficult for the Russians. So basically what they've tried to do is encircle those Ukrainian forces coming from the north and from the south to the north from Mariupol, which is why taking that town was so important. But we're talking about a line from the north of Ukraine to the Azov Sea that's 275 miles long. So actually having an effective encirclement is going to be quite difficult, cutting off all lines of supply that the Ukrainians have. So this is not going to be easy. However, it's much more of a plausibly achievable operational objective than fighting 5 different fronts at the same time, which is what the Russians initially tried to do.
I ask you about Ukrainian resistance because we've seen how strong it is all across the country, and yet we also know in the Donbas region close to Russia, we know many of the people who live there, some of them, feel an affinity with Russia. Do you have a sense of how many do? How would you say the public, what the public attitude there is toward Russia?
I think from what we know about polling that took place in the Ukrainian government-controlled areas, the parts that the Russian-backed rebels didn't control before this latest phase in the war that began in February, there was not significant separatist sentiment, a desire to join Russia or to completely leave Ukraine. People might have gripes with the government in Kiev, but they certainly did not want to become part of Russia. And in Ukraine, this is the sort of paradox that to be Russian-speaking doesn't necessarily mean to be pro-Russian or to want to sort of leave Ukraine. It just means sort of different historical, cultural identities. And so I don't think there's going to be widespread pro-Russian sentiment in a lot of these places.
Meaning we can expect the Ukrainians to put up a fight. But it sounds like bottom line, Sam Charap, is we are in for what could be a long and protracted battle for the Donbas.
It's certainly not going to be a matter of days, weeks at the very least, and potentially longer than that.
Sam Charap with the RAND Corporation, we thank you.
Thanks for having me, Judy.